In December 2018, during the New Year's Eve, Edwin Campbell was arrested at his home after kidnapping a pizza delivery driver and murdering a neighbor after being discovered. The man was charged and then locked up in a psychiatric hospital. In this dramatization provided by the pizza delivery man, we will learn his story. You know, I used to be one of those people who thought the streets weren't dangerous. I mean, I always thought that insecurity was something they only showed on TV and that in reality, no one was really in danger, as long as they didn't do anything risky. Today, I still regret how innocent I was. Sometimes there are things that change the way you look at life. Things that turn everything you believe in upside down and make you start from scratch. In my case, it all happened one night. One night, a person made me rethink everything I think to the point of being terrified of the night. It all started at my old job. I used to be a pizza delivery guy at night. It didn't make good money, but it was supplemented by my morning job. That day was December 31st, and I was working nights before the party because I knew the tips were huge. In between my deliveries, I had to go to an apartment. Once I rang the doorbell, the door rang, inviting me into the apartment. I'm not gonna lie. Normally, I don't go into apartments and wait for the customer to come down. But I was in a hurry. I just wanted to give him the pizza, have my tip, and leave. Once I knocked on the door to the right room, the door opened, and a shy but neurotic man opened the door for me. His house was horrendous. It was full of cockroaches and dirt everywhere. I handed him the pizza and let him pay me, but in a terrifyingly thin voice, the man spoke to me and caught me totally off guard.
Hey, would you like to stay and eat with me? It's a new year, and I feel very lonely. I would like someone to eat with me to celebrate.
Sorry, man, I have a family too.
Please, stay. I don't want to eat alone. This is a special day.
I tried to free myself from his hand, but his fingers were like sharp claws. I understood that I was in a compromising situation, so in a firm voice, I told him that I had other orders and that I should keep working to celebrate with my kids. He looked disappointed, but finally let go of my shoulder. I walked quickly to my bike. This person was totally insane. I admit, I may have been a bit harsh with him, but I preferred to get that problem out of the way. While I was absorbed with my thoughts, I heard someone running quickly towards me. By the time I could react and turn around, it was too late. All I remember is seeing the man I had delivered the pizza to next to me, putting a strange-smelling handkerchief to my nose. After that, everything went blurry, and with no energy in my legs, I fell to the ground. That strange smell, the one that the man had put on the handkerchief, that was chloroform. Confused and not knowing where I was, I opened my eyes after a long nap that could have lasted minutes or hours. As I looked around me, I began to remember everything that had happened and tried to scream, but I couldn't, because I had a sock in my mouth. Even though I had seen it for a few seconds, I recognized the place. This was the apartment of the psychopath I had delivered the pizza earlier, only this time it was inside the house and not outside. Next to the door, I saw him again. Next to the door, I saw him again. He was sitting there with the same psycho face, staring at me with a huge grin. Desperate, I moved around violently, trying to get out of his grip, but there was no way. The man had tied me so tightly that there was no way I could escape unless someone untied me. Seeing how helpless and terrified I was, the man approached me with the pizza box in his hand.
Hey, you were rude before. Were you really going to let a customer spend the holidays alone? What if he's depressed? A depressed person during a New Year's Eve party can do crazy things.
Please let me go. My family is waiting for me. I just want to be with them.
Don't worry. I'm not crazy or something.
Once he told me this, my skin crawled and I began to cry inconsolably. I knew it wouldn't help me at all, but it was the only way to unload all the sadness and despair I was suffering at that moment. Ignoring me, he approached me and after opening the box, revealed a rotten pizza full of cockroaches. This was not the pizza I had delivered. Noticing my confusion, he spoke to me again, and what he said next made me realize what I was dealing with. He told me that he was going to save the pizza I gave him today to eat it in a few weeks. In the meantime, we were going to eat an old pizza that had been sitting in that box for weeks. I looked around and noticed something else. The house was full of pizza boxes, which may or may not have been empty. Trying to think of my chances of escape, my stomach turned as I watched the man eat the rotten pizza. I wanted to vomit. But the little liquid I managed to expel from my mouth was trapped in the sock in my mouth, forcing me to swallow it again. Meanwhile, he was still enjoying the disgusting rotten pizza. When he finished taking the first few bites, the nightmare continued. The psychopath began to mention to me how lonely he felt eating alone and how glad he was to have company at mealtime. He grabbed a piece of rotten pizza and passed it over my face, trying to shove pieces of mozzarella in with his fingers, which was forcing the sock into the side of my mouth.
Happy New Year! Oh, wait. It's bad luck to say it this soon, right? Now eat up!
My only reaction to this was to cry and cry, trying my hardest not to vomit and choke. Suddenly, in a moment of salvation, I heard something. Someone was banging on the door. The psychopath noticed this too and slowly approached to see what was going on. Once he did, I could see for a few seconds that there was a lady behind the door, and she looked furious. Once the psychopath approached her, the lady asked him several questions about why there was so much screaming or if something had happened. The psychopath denied everything, and the situation quickly escalated. They both raised their voices, and in an act of impulsivity, the lady peeked into the apartment and saw me. Her reaction was obvious. She began to scream in desperation as she ran to her room. After removing the lock and opening the front door, the psychopath ran in the direction of the lady. Since I was tied up, I couldn't see anything, but what I was hearing was enough. First, I heard the psychopath's footsteps running towards the lady. Once he caught up with her, he used his hands to slam her head against the floor. The lady's screams became more and more muffled, but by the fourth or fifth blow, nothing could be heard anymore. After a few seconds of silence, the footsteps were heard again, and they returned to this room. He was home again, and there was blood in his hands. Before he could lock himself in, some neighbors entered the psychopath's house and began to beat him. They saw what he did to the old lady from their homes. When they saw me, they automatically released me, and I called 911. Shortly after, the police arrived and took the psychopath away. The neighbors told me that they came out of their homes because of the screams of the lady. During that same night, more than 10 bodies were found in the basement of the building. This man had been killing with impunity for months. After the police interviewed him, he kept saying that he was innocent, as he only invited people to join him for a meal. The man was locked up in a psychiatric hospital, and I find it hard to believe that he will ever be released. So far, they have never found his family or anyone to come take care of him, and his case is only going downhill. As for me, that was the last time I ever worked delivering pizzas, or with any job that involves interacting with people. I feel like something in me was broken that day. Just thinking about what that psychopath would have done to me if the lady hadn't interceded, it just turns my stomach. Hello everyone. We are thrilled that you have been enjoying our videos. Your support means the world to us. If you've liked what you've seen, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. We would love to hear which one of our videos is your favorite. We're on a mission to reach 100,000 members in the SSG family, and with your help, we can achieve that goal. Thank you for being a part of our journey.
Hey, my name is Evan, and what I'm about to tell you now may seem a little unbelievable, but I need you to open your mind to what you are about to hear. This is the story of how a simple New Year's Eve party with my family turned into an encounter with the unknown. And that encounter almost made it the last party we ever had in our lives. It was the last night of the year, and we were all excited to welcome the new year. My family and I decided to celebrate in a secluded cabin on the outskirts of town. The cabin looked like a lovely place in the pictures, surrounded by thick forest. We arrived before dark and settled in. The atmosphere was quite good. We were all very happy to be able to celebrate the holidays together and away from the city. The cabin looked cozy with a huge fireplace in the living room. We had a simple dinner and toasted with champagne as we awaited the arrival of the new year. As the night progressed, the temperature outside the cabin dropped and the wind blew hard through the trees. Let me ask you, did it ever happen to you that, out of the blue, you started to feel that something was very wrong? It was a really strange feeling. Even though we were all together, I felt a strange sense of uneasiness, a feeling that my family and I were in danger. I tried to calm down. Surely it was the nerves for the new year that was coming. Although at that moment I knew I shouldn't ignore my feelings. I knew I was lying to myself by denying them. We decided to play board games to distract ourselves. While we were playing, we heard knocking at the door. At first we thought it was the wind or some animal in the woods, but the knocking became louder and more persistent. While my family was left to play, I approached the door to see what was causing the noise. My kids were pretty scared, but I told them that it always happens, that they were normal cabin noises, but that I was going to leave them alone for just a moment to go see what it was. To tell you the truth, I must admit that I lied to them, and added to my previous feeling. I was absolutely terrified. At first, I peeked through the door, but I didn't see anything. At that moment, I realized something. I was in the middle of nowhere. Why was I so afraid? Challenging myself, I went out the front door and started looking for the author of the noise. My search was unsuccessful, and to be honest, I was happy. Despite the strangeness, we continued with our games, trying to ignore the banging. But the atmosphere in the cabin was becoming increasingly tense. The lights began to flicker and suddenly went out completely. We were plunged into total darkness.
Dad, does this always happen? Mom, I'm scared. What's happening? Dad, please make the light come back.
To tell you the truth, both my wife and I were absolutely terrified. We had both come to the cabin before, and nothing like this had ever happened. We tried to calm the children down as best we could, but it was becoming very difficult, as we couldn't even calm each other down. From one second to the next, the cabin became much colder. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The only source of light came from the fireplace, but it was already fading. As we tried to light candles, we heard whispers rustling from the shadows. The voices were barely audible, but they were loud enough for everyone to hear.
Dad, did you hear that? You heard that, didn't you?
As we walked through the rooms, I felt something watching us. As we reached the master bedroom, the door slammed shut behind us. We tried to open it, but it was no use. It was as if the door was sealed. Suddenly, a dark shadow appeared in a corner. It had no definitive shape, just a dark mass moving slowly toward us. We shouted and struggled with the door, but nothing. It was still completely closed. The shadow was getting closer and closer, and I could feel pressure in the air as if it was becoming more and more suffocating with each passing second. My children were crying, and my wife, in a panic, was banging on the door with me as hard as she could. In desperation, we managed to get the door open and escape from the room. We ran into the living room and closed the door behind us. The shadow didn't seem willing to follow us for now. We stood in the living room, trembling with fear and not understanding what had just happened. We decided to leave the cabin and look for help, but when we opened the front door, we were confronted with a completely different landscape. The forest was shrouded in a dense fog, and we couldn't see more than a few meters ahead. There were no road signs or lights from any other nearby cabins. Not knowing where to go or what to do, we ran without direction, hoping to find some sign of civilization. The fog enveloped every step we took. Before I knew it, my wife and son were gone. I wanted to go back to look for them. I wanted to retrace my steps and face whatever was behind me, but I couldn't do it. My daughter was still in my arms, so I decided to just keep running while covering her face, hoping to find some place to leave her so I could turn around and go look for the rest of the family. Unlike my daughter, I could see everything. As we moved forward, we heard distant laughter and murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere. I felt watched, haunted by something invisible. As I looked into the forest, I could see shadows running everywhere, coming and going, surrounding us. Behind us, we could see nothing. But for some strange reason, I knew There was something there. After what seemed like an eternity, we reached the road, but it was completely empty. There, I saw a strange figure standing in front of us. It was a tall, thin silhouette with glowing eyes, staring at us. I froze, unable to look away. The figure began to slowly approach. This was the shadow from before. The mist thickened around it. We could hear his light footsteps, but couldn't see his features clearly. We felt the air grow colder as it got closer. The figure stopped and began to mutter incomprehensible words. They were the same words we heard in the cabin. Instantly, the laughter and whispers we had heard earlier intensified. The fog grew thicker, enveloping us completely. I left my hands on my daughter's eyes and closed mine as well, fearing what would come next. With my eyes closed, I heard a violent roar and saw a light rapidly approaching us through my eyelids. That noise. I knew that noise. When I opened my eyes, my wife and son were in front of us, on top of the truck. I climbed in with my daughter while the figure was still approaching us. My wife tried to start the truck, but it wouldn't start. We looked out the window and the shadow was gone. But before we could calm down, the van started to move from side to side as if someone was shaking it. Whatever was attacking us, it had a lot of force, so much that it was about to knock the van over. Suddenly, my wife managed to start the truck and accelerated as fast as she could, leaving all the fog behind us. When I turned around and looked out the window, I could see the shadow materialize out of the fog once again, walking to the center of the road and staring at us as we ran away. We never returned to the cabin. By the time the new year rolled around, we were inside the truck crying. Once we got home, in the middle of the fireworks, we gathered in our bed with the kids and slept in each other's arms, hoping the day would pass as quickly as possible. I never saw that shadow again, even when I went back to the cabin with some family members to get our things. I never knew what happened during that New Year's holiday, but it was as if, together with the previous year, that being decided to disappear, never to return.
Hi, I'm Daniel, and I'm a firefighter. You must be wondering why I'm telling you about my profession. That's because I'm about to tell you the story of why I decided to be a firefighter. I'm an orphan, and on the day I turned 18, my foster family kicked me out of their house. It was a hellhole, to be honest, but at least I had a roof over my head and a bed to sleep in while I lived with them. It was my birthday and also my first day on the street. Did I mention I was born on the 31st of December, so technically it was New Year's Eve, too. I had about $200 that I somehow managed to save up from my job at the bakery, and a small duffel bag full of clothes from the thrift store. My foster parents took all the money I earned and left me with the bare minimum. Now, I was free, but still had nowhere to go. I knew life on the streets was hard, so I approached a homeless shelter the same day, but unfortunately, there was no place for anyone. And so I began my first day as a homeless adult. I still had my job, so sooner or later I knew I would be able to rent a cheap apartment. But I didn't know how long it would take. I was just a high school graduate with no finance or plan to go to college. I went to my job next. The bakery was awfully busy, as it was the year end. I finished my shift at about 7 p.m., and as a gift to myself, grabbed a slice of cheesecake to celebrate my 18th birthday. The day I finally left my hellish foster family behind deserved a small celebration. After eating the cheesecake, I was walking on the sidewalk with nowhere to go, so I just decided to sleep on a park bench. It was around 9 in the evening when I was just laying on the bench with my duffel bag under my head, staring at the moving branches above. The park was almost completely deserted, so I was a bit spooked when someone touched my foot. I got up and looked at the two people standing in front of me. The couple looked as if they were in their late 70s. Both were dressed in modest clothes and were smiling at me. They looked harmless, so I asked, "What do you both want?" To which the old lady said,
Son, it's the 31st of December. Are you just going to sleep on this old rusty park bench and wake up to the new year?
I immediately knew she was kidding, so I smiled back and said, "Ma'am, I'm sorry if it bothers you, but I'm homeless and have nowhere to go, so I decided to sleep in the park."
Son, it's going to be the new year in a few hours, and no one deserves to be alone on the last day of the year. Would you like to join us for dinner tonight? We would love to host you.
Apart from a single slice of cheesecake, I had nothing the whole day. My stomach grumbled in acknowledgement before I could even say yes, so I had no choice but to go with the couple. They both smiled at me and led the way to their home. I silently followed the couple as they took me to their home, which wasn't far away from the park. Once we entered their modest one-story home, I immediately smelled the food. It was chilly outside, but their home was pretty warm and comfy. We sat around the table, which was full of delicious-looking dishes. The couple was very hospitable and let me have the first serving of each dish. Soon, we were all laughing and enjoying the food. They even asked me what my story was, and I told them what happened before, even the fact that it was my birthday that day. Soon our meal came to an end, and the old lady brought a cheesecake.
Son, I may have prepared the whole dinner, but I'm not so good at making desserts. My husband bought this cake from the famous bakery downtown. I hope you like it.
I just stared at the couple with tears in my eyes. It was a great coincidence. What were the odds that the couple had bought the cake that I loved the most from the bakery I worked in on my birthday, and now had invited me to share their meal with them? I had no words, so I began weeping at the dinner table. The old man patted my back and helped me gain my composure. At last, we cut the cake, and it was the first real birthday I'd ever had. None of my foster families cared about my birthday, always too drunk or too busy on the last day of the year to pay attention to me. I ate half of the cake, even though I was full. It was finally my time to leave. I could not impose on the old couple anymore, although they insisted I stayed in their home instead of seeking shelter in the park. But I was not going to exploit their generosity, so I left. While I was tying my shoes, the old lady handed me a container full of the remaining cheesecake. "Don't you guys want to eat it?" I asked, to which the man replied, "We are old folk. We should stay away from sweets if we want to live a long life." And then he laughed. I left their home with a full stomach and a heavy heart, with only one thought on my mind. Why did I never have a foster family like this? The next day I was woken up by an unknown man wearing a suit. I had slept on the same bench in the park. "Are you Daniel Jordan?" "Yes, I am. Who are you?" "Oh, I'm Michael Rivers. I work at the homeless shelter. You were there yesterday looking for a bed. Well, one of the occupants just left, so we have a spot for you if you're still interested." Michael asked. "Yes, that would be great." "Good. So follow me. Let's get you settled in." On our way to the shelter, he asked me a few questions about myself. We made small talk, and finally he said, "You must be starving, Daniel. Let's hope the breakfast buffet is still open when we reach the shelter." I know he was joking, but suddenly I reached into my duffel bag and grabbed the container full of cheesecake. Remembering the whole evening I spent with the nice old couple, I wished to know more about them and who they were. As of yesterday, I hardly got any chance to speak about them. Partly because I was busy eating and answering their questions, so I decided to ask Michael. "Hey, do you know Mr. and Mrs. Alberto? They live on 83rd Street. They must be well into their late 70s. Michael stopped in his tracks and looked me straight in the eyes and said, "The Alberto family died in a fire years ago. It's a quite well-known tragedy in this part of the town. The home on 83rd Street has not been renovated since the fire in which Mr. and Mrs. Alberto passed away. What do you want to know about them all of a sudden?" I just stood on the sidewalk listening to Michael. I knew that Michael grew up in this neighborhood, he had just mentioned it. So his information could be trusted. But I couldn't shake the fact that I had just eaten dinner with the couple a couple of hours ago. I stuffed my duffel bag into Michael's hands and ran towards 83rd Street. Michael had no chance of knowing what was wrong with me, so he ran behind me too. Once we both stood in front of the Alberto house, it would be an understatement to say that I was shocked, because I was shaken to my core. The home was no more than several pillars and a few walls attached to a broken, crumbled roof. The remains of the home were completely charcoal black, indicating that fire had destroyed the home and killed its owners. "What are you looking at, buddy? What's so interesting in this burnt house that you ran almost 5 blocks to see it?" Michael asked, catching his breath. "You may think I sound crazy, but I've met the Albertos." "Oh, so you know them from your childhood?" Michael thought I had met them when they were alive. "No, Michael. I met them yesterday." What are you trying to say? Are you drunk, Daniel?" "No, I'm sober, but I met them in the park yesterday." And I narrated the whole incident to him. Michael was confused and didn't believe me at first, but when I started to specify the details of the home from before it was burnt and how the couple offered to help me, he too believed that I had indeed met the ghost of Mr. and Mrs. Alberto. That day, standing in front of that burnt house, I decided to be a firefighter. I realized that no matter what, the good in the world always remains good, and they both should have been alive if it weren't for the fire. I don't know why the couple helped me or what their motive was, but they sure did make me feel special and loved. They gave me a purpose in my life and helped me when I was at my lowest. Now, as a firefighter, I make sure I save each and every person I can. And that day, as I and Michael walked away from the Alberto house, I dug into my duffel bag, and guess what? The container was still full of cheesecake.